It's an unsolved murder 108 years ago. It's still subject to speculation and conversation, but it's an interesting story, an intriguing story. And it's very rare that a prosecuting attorney gets charged with murdering his wife, but it happened in St. Joseph, Missouri in July 1916.
The history of St. Joseph spans almost 200 years, and in order to help share and tell the stories over those years, I brought in some help, a local historian of sorts. A former newspaper reporter and editor, Bob Slater, sitting down to talk about all of his knowledge and stories from his time in St. Joseph and covering the city he loves.
Bob, one of the biggest maybe mysteries in St. Joe, crime history is the case of Harriet McDaniel, 33-year-old mother of three, that died, about 108 years ago now? That crime is always been maybe something that people around here have been interested by, right?
Right. It's part of the most sensational crime in St. Joseph history, and still it's unsolved. Nobody ever convicted the murderer. But Harriet Moss McDaniel had been a beauty queen at Central High School. She was married to Oscar McDaniel, the prosecuting attorney. He was a rising star in Democratic politics. He was the orator they called on. They won a special speech. Oscar McDaniel was a man. On July 14th, 1916, as you say, 108 years ago, McDaniel left his home, came home, found his wife bludgeoned with a blunt instrument. She died the next day. McDaniel explained, he had been out that night, came home early in the evening, and got a phone call that one of his relatives was causing a problem at a saloon at 6th and Messina Street. So he drove down there, found out nothing to the story, so he bought a drink for everybody in the house, walked over to 8th and Messina, or drove to 8th and Messina. Again, when his relative been disturbing things there, no, so it's just a fake call. And so he bought a drink for everybody in the house, making it clear that he had been out there with the buying drinks in both places. So he explained to police he got home. Somebody fired shots in his car. He carried gun carrier himself. He pulled out a pistol, returned the fire. Nobody got hit or anything, but so he went and found his wife badly bleeding in the bedroom. The two young kids sitting in the bedroom next to her heard nothing. The older boy had been spending the night with his grandparents. So they took Miss McDaniel to the hospital. He rode the ambulance. She died the next morning, and it became a sensational story. Everybody wondered what had happened, because McDaniel had a reputation as a tough prosecuting attorney. He said some enemies had done this, but police weren't quite so sure. But they brought in bloodhounds to try to check the scene. They brought Burns Detective Agency to run some special checks on it, and went on for weeks. 10 weeks after the crime, about 10 weeks, two police detectives got in a streetcar, rode out 22nd and Duncan, walked the 3 blocks or so to McDaniel's house. McDaniel's home was on South 20th Street, just south of Duncan Street. It's been since torn down. Another house been built in that place. But so they went to McDaniel and said, "We have a warrant for your arrest." He didn't ask to see the warrant. He just asked to make sure they had one. They said yes. And so he said, they want to take you to jail. He said, it's a warm night. I've been in the house all day. Do you mind if we walk? So it's about 2 miles to the police station down in 7th and Messina Street at that time. So they walked down there. He's very relaxed and everything. He said, you mind if I stop at a drugstore to get some cigars and some medicine? So they went to a drugstore down there. He got his cigars, medicine, went to the jail, and booked him in charge of murder, and said, "You have any statement?" Yes, said, "I expressed my sympathy to Mrs. Moss, the mother of his wife, and my mother, and I'm going to vote for Woodrow Wilson for president, Gardner governor, and Burr for Congress." That was the end of his statement. Anything else, they repeated the same statement. So at that time, you could not make bond if you'd been indicted by a grand jury. No grand juries in session. So they took McDaniel to the jail, the county jail, which at that time was on the same square block as the courthouse, up there on the corner of 5th and Farron Street. And then they locked him up. And he, of course, he was elected prosecuting attorney, but he locked up in jail. He continued to run his office. He'd have an assistant prosecutor come over. I want to dismiss this case. I want to increase the charge on this one and do this, do that. During the whole routine. It's also a kind of relaxed environment. He went to lunch several days with friends. Each time the sheriff said accompanied by a deputy sheriff. So he was under control. But they said, well, I had a better suntan. He got out of jail than when he went in. He spent so much time outside. But anyway, I'm traveling. And finally, after the grand jury convened, and after about 3 weeks, McDaniel released on bond, a $50,000 bond signed by some of the more prominent citizens of St. Joseph, including True Davis Sr. They had a lot of the big shots there signed, expressing confidence in McDaniel. So he, was, of course, run for re-election. He had been nominated in August without opposition, and so he rented the Lyceum Theater, which is the major theater in town. That and the Tudor were the two big theaters. And he rented the Lyceum Theater and spoke for 90 minutes from just notes on the back of an envelope. So at the theater, I don't know, probably held 1,000 people. So another 2,000 were outside trying to get in to hear him. And so I'm going to stirring speech, but it wasn't enough. He got beat by a Republican in the general election. That's the only Republican elected that year. So McDaniel was free on bond and still run his office and everything, but he went to trial in late November of 2016. It wasn't like these days when you wait 3 years for to go to trial. He went to trial fairly quickly. The trial lasted 17 days, and every morning people started getting as early as 6 o'clock in the morning to get a seat in the courtroom. Judge Ryan was presiding, and the courtroom jammed every day. They had so many people up there. They even had police around the courtroom to make sure everything was organized and that. So McDaniel denied that any involvement in it, said that he went back, that he had been to a lodge meeting, came home, went back and checked the reported relative cause of disturbance, and that was his alibi. The state said no. They produced witnesses said that the time that happened did not justify his time, and so the state had brought in the Attorney General, John Barker, the Attorney General, to be the lead prosecutor, and it was this long. The defense attorney, Charles Stropp, spoke 6 hours in his final argument for that. Kind of wear a jury out with that, I guess. But anyway, Barker got up to make his closing comments and said a dramatic speech. And this is how cool McDaniel was. But Barker gets done. He asked for McDaniel to be put to death, asked for the death penalty. He gets done talking. McDaniel walks over and says, "That's the finest speech I've ever heard." And that's how cool he was. So the case goes to jury, and McDaniel, first ballot is 10-2 for acquittal, second ballot 10-2, third 11-1, and fourth a unanimous verdict for acquittal. And McDaniel then they had a few weeks left in his term. He ran out his term, and then rented an office in the Donnell Court building down at 5th and Francis Street. And strangely enough, one of the people across the hallway from him was Bart Lockwood, who had been an assistant prosecuting attorney involved in the prosecution of McDaniel. So the two were basically roommates up there. I don't know how well they got along, but at least they were right the same building across the hallway from each other. But after about 3 years, McDaniel left town and disappeared. And then went to Washington, D.C., it was understood. But then one night, the News Press got a tip from a cab driver. There'd been a secret burial out of Mount Morris Cemetery. And so my dad and Norman Stewart, the courthouse reporter, were instructed by Arthur Burroughs, the editor, to go out there and check it out. The cemetery, people very non-committal would tell them nothing. So they began walking around the cemetery. They found Mrs. Moss' grave, and right next to her grave was the grave of Oscar Mack. That was the name he used for burial. So he's buried under the name of Oscar Mack, but he's buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery. But the police interviewed all sorts of suspects. The blunt instrument used to kill Miss McDaniel was never found, and so to this day, nobody knows who did the murder. McDaniel, some people say, was the man. Some people say he killed his wife because he had been unfaithful to her, and she was very upset. He got angry with her and killed her. Others said no. The kids said they knew no arguments between the two, that everything seemed to be fine. So whether it was outsider, some enemy of McDaniel or what, but to this day, people speculate all they want. And the jury found him innocent. I guess we accept that verdict. That's the way our system works. And so only the Lord knows who actually killed Harriet Moss McDaniel. But a mother of three, 33 years old, 1905 beauty queen in Central High School. And, here's a rising young man, the start of the Democratic Party, and boom, everything just blows up like that.